always been very entrepreneurial. I've always had kind of something working. Some of the ideas are bigger than others, but I've always kind of had that inside of me. I think for sure a big part of that certainly comes from my father. I was raised in a household where I was told that good isn't good when great is expected. And so our expectations of me and my brothers was always very, very high, that if you have it in you, then go and do it, and don't ever be looking to be employed by anybody. And I think that in the end was a blessing, right? That I'm 150% unemployable. There's not a chance I could ever work for anybody else because I just don't know any other way than to do it this way.
Welcome back to Keeping It Real Estate. Today we have a special guest, Kent Clothier. I just got to say how stoked I am to have you on with us today, Kent. I heard you speak a while back at a real estate event. We were just talking about it. And I can honestly say I was so impressed by your presentation, and just your ability to put words together to move the audience was remarkable. I remember being very moved by your talk. So for those of you who don't know Kent is a nationally recognized entrepreneur, performance coach, and a speaker. He got his start in business at 17, helping to create a grocery arbitrage company, ultimately building the company to 1.8 billion in annual sales by the age of 30. Kent and the Clothier family now run a real estate investment company and have flipped more than 8,000 single-family homes, and the company currently manages a portfolio of over 7,500 single-family homes in 11 markets. So with that being said, Kent, thank you so much for being here. Maybe you just want to share a little bit about how you got started in business at 17 years old and the journey of the grocery arbitrage company.
First off, thanks for having me, man. I'm glad. It's really my pleasure to be here and kind of pour into the audience. And so I was raised by an entrepreneur. My father was in the grocery industry my entire life. And so he owned grocery stores as I was growing up, and convenience stores. So I kind of grew up, I was at their stocking shelves when I was 12 years old. And so along the way, we noticed that there was a very disjointed and fragmented industry. And, this is all pre-internet. And so what used to happen back in the industry back in the day is that different distributors and wholesalers and providers, brokers, would send in catalogs every single week into our location and basically say, hey, we'd love to supply these items to you. And sure enough, when you looked inside of those catalogs, you would quickly find that the exact same item was being sold at significantly different prices. There are roughly about 50,000 items in any grocery store. And what most people don't realize is that what their local grocery store, the reason why some grocery stores can sell, a special, put it out on the flyer on the internet, hey, Maxwell House coffee this week, we're going to sell it for whatever it is, $8 a can. And then the guy down the street selling it for $14 a can, is because for one reason or another, that store has been able to tap into some discount provided by either directly from the manufacturer or, again, whoever their distributor is. And so when that happens, if you think about it, you've got the exact same item all over the country, standardized item. Maxwell House coffee is the exact same can of coffee in San Diego as it is in, Wisconsin or New York or wherever, but it's being sold at very, very different prices. And so an enterprising guy like myself, along with my father and several others, we kind of jumped in and figured out that we could go to the stores or go to the local grocery chains and buy it effectively right out the back door. Say, hey, you don't even ever have to take it off the truck. We'll pick it up. You never have to put it on your store shelves, on the floor. You don't have to do any of that. And what you have to keep in mind is that a grocery store makes, after they've done everything, they make about a 2% net profit, right? So they sell billions of dollars through their stores, but literally make a 2% net profit. And so a lot of effort and energy goes into getting that item on our stores and ultimately in our hands, but at a very, very small margin. So when you've got somebody like me that comes along and says, listen, I'll give you a 20% markup right now. I'll pay you in cash up front, wire the money in. You never even have to put it on the shelves. I'll put it on a truck and I'm just going to buy it from you. And then we would, do exactly that. But then we would ship it to somewhere else in the country where that same truckload of coffee, we could still sell it at a discount to whatever grocery store or grocery supplier wanted it. But we would make a hefty margin along the way. So in other words, we would buy it, at $40 a case in San Diego, and we would go sell it for $80 a case in New York. And the list price on it all day long, what the stores were used to paying was, $95. So everybody was winning. The manufacturers clearly hated what we were doing. But once you possess the items, there wasn't a whole heck of a lot they could do about it. And that business that we started, when I was 17 years old, as you pointed out, by the time I was 30, we were selling roughly about $1.8 billion a year, never manufactured a single thing.
Oh my gosh. What's interesting about that, it seems so easy. I mean, I'm sure there was much more to it.
Well, it's certainly probably easier today. I mean, it's been 20 years since I left that industry, but you have to think it was a very manual process back then. Right now, with automation and information and access to the internet and all these kinds of things, I would love to think that it's never been easier than now. I mean, you see versions of this happening today with people, buying distressed merchandise, whether it's from overstock.com or TJ Maxx or whoever, and then turn around just selling those items on the retail market up on eBay or whatever, or on Amazon. It's the same kind of logic. Anytime you see a very, very inefficient market, there's opportunity, right? When it's hard for two different parties to get together and really agree on a price. I mean, if you just think about the real estate market,
yeah,
right? In theory, every institutional buyer in the country, because they have the means and they have the desire, you would think that they would buy every multifamily and single family property. The reality of it is it's so inefficient and hard for them to get to those distressed assets or those motivated sellers that that's just simply not the case. And that's the same thing that applied in that industry.
Wow. What would you say? I mean, looking back, just not everyone is built that way. Was it your dad, or what was it? What are your qualities? What are some of the traits you hold that you think were?
That's a freaking great question, dude. I will tell you that since I've always been an entrepreneur. I started a t-shirt business when I was in my teens. I started a fax company when I was in my teens. Basically, I figured out that I could go lease fax machines at 17 years old, 16 years old. And this is, again, I'm aging myself, right? This is 30 years ago, but back when fax machines were a thing and they used to be the size of a copier and they were $4,000 or $5,000. This is before they were what they are today. I figured out that I could go lease them and pay a few $100s a month. And then I could go put them inside of a print shop, and the print shop could charge by the copy, and I would split the profits with them. So I've always been very entrepreneurial. I've always had kind of something working. Some of the ideas are bigger than others, but I've always kind of had that inside of me. I think for sure, a big part of that certainly comes from my father. I was raised in a household where I was told that good isn't good when great is expected. And so our expectations of me and my brothers was always very, very high, that if you have it in you, then go and do it, and don't ever be looking to be employed by anybody. And I think that in the end was a blessing, right? That I'm 150% unemployable. There's not a chance I could ever work for anybody else because I just don't know any other way than to do it this way.
Wow. I like that quote right there. So when good isn't good, or we'll say it one more time.
Good is not good when great is expected.
Got it. I'm writing this down here on my end, you guys. Good is not good when great is expected. I got kids, I gotta influence, and he's 10 and 5, and these guys are at the prime age right now where for me to program their mind. Just exactly.
No doubt, brother. No doubt.
I love that. So, okay. So transitioning from the grocery arbitrage to real estate investing, it's a pretty massive shift.
Yeah.
What motivated you to move, into the real estate sector? Was it in 2002-ish, or when was that?
Yeah, try losing everything. That would be the motivation. And so in 2000, I was in South Florida. I lived in Delray Beach, Florida, and I got into a run-in with my business partners and effectively got run out of there. And as I should have been, basically, we had a disagreement, and I was like, all right, I'm out. Let's figure out how to part ways in some kind of amicable way. And then spent the next 2 years like a spoiled brat trying to sue my former partners and go, and they're suing me. I'm suing them. I'm trying to pirate their employees. I'm trying to pirate their customers. I'm doing everything I possibly could do to be a spoiled brat little prick about all of it, and ultimately made every bad financial decision that you could possibly make, because while I'm doing it, clearly I'm trying to build my business at the expense of their business, because I was upset and mad and, felt like I'd been slighted. And so horrible way to start a business, but I learned some really valuable lessons, and it only took me 22 months to lose every single dollar I'd ever earned in my life, millions of dollars. And, I left in March 14th of 2000, and by December of 2022, I should have filed for bankruptcy, but I did not because I had too much pride. But I wiped myself out completely financially. And so with my back against the wall and had nowhere else to turn, and had just recently had to sell my house and cars and everything I owned and move in with my girlfriend at the time, happened to see one of those late night infomercials on real estate and saw a Russ Whitney infomercial, and just happened to be desperate enough and broke enough that I needed to make some kind of different decision, because it wasn't bad enough that I was losing everything on the way down, but at some level of being as successful as I was, my entire identity, all of my friendships, all of my relations were all inside of this organization, right? I was the guy. And so in losing it all, I didn't just lose the business. I lost, the friends, the associations, all the relations. And so this, I was in a really bad spot. And so ultimately had no real place to turn to, kind of turned to this infomercial, went and checked out, and they were from the front of the room. They were talking about wholesaling. I had about $4,000 in the bank. They wanted me to spend $1,000 on a course. I was petrified to do it, but I did it. And sure enough, about 6 weeks later, I had closed on my first deal and made, $8,200. And, I can remember sitting in my car and bawling like a baby, because I had, that was everything to me, right? Getting $8,000 and kind of making it happen out of thin air from a completely different industry that I knew absolutely nothing about was a very big deal to me. But kind of put me on the path, right? And it did not take me long. Within 3 years, I was wholesaling, 300 houses a year, and had already kind of started applying all the things I had learned along the way in building another company, started bringing that into this very, very fragmented hustler type business. Kind of everybody looked at wholesaling back then as kind of a side hustle at best, if not a 4-letter word, right? And so it was kind of one of those things that had a really bad reputation, but I quickly was able to connect the dots and figure out that this is exactly what I was doing in groceries. And if I could go turn it into a multi-billion-dollar business over here, what is preventing me from doing it in real estate? And so all the instincts kicked in, and we were off to the races.
You talk to most people who have done or are doing big things, a lot of them have lost it all or have had major setbacks. What would be, I guess, the biggest lesson or two that if you're looking back, you'd have done it differently, or anything that you could share that was...
I would not have done one thing different. I would never wish that on I wouldn't even wish it on my worst enemy, right? But what I will tell you is that it was perfect for me, right? I was the guy at the time. I was 30 years old. I was making millions of dollars. I'd been wildly successful. I had never failed at anything in my life. My entire world was inside of those 4 walls. I had no perspective or appreciation for loss. I did not even know what that looked like, or failure. And I was not humble about it, right? I was, thank God social media didn't exist back then, but I was the guy that all of this success was because of me, and all you had to do was ask me, and I'd be happy to tell you. And so I needed to lose. And I'm not sure I needed to lose as dramatically and as publicly and profoundly as I did. But, when I was going through it, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And if you'd have told me then that I would ever look back on it and have this conversation right now and say, hey, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, I'd have told you you're crazy. But, getting 20 some odd years removed from it, it was the best, exactly what I needed in that moment. Again, ultimately, you and I would not be talking right now if it hadn't happened, and I had to go on a different path. And I had to understand that, number one, most people have no idea how close they are flying to the sun at any given moment, right? And meaning most businesses are one attorney general inquiry or one FTC complaint or one whatever, government interaction, and your business evaporates overnight, right? Because they don't play fair. And that really kind of made me think more logically about what I was doing. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it on purpose. I'm going to do it the right way, lots of integrity. I'm going to know that time is really what it's all about. It is not about status, right? It's about creating quality moments with my family and the people that I care the most about, and building a business that does that, versus getting so sucked up in the minutia of it and the bravado of it, and pounding on my chest and saying, hey, I'll be the first one in the office and the last one to leave, and I'm going to go build $1 billion business, and nothing's going to stop me. And no, I'm not going to take any time off, and I'm not going to spend any time with my kids, and I'm quote unquote doing it for them. All the nonsense that we say as men. that was really important for me to learn those lessons, right? Those are the mistakes I'd made in my 20s. But equally, the lesson is that, you have to expect to get hit. You have to look forward to getting hit. You have to understand that actually brings out the best in you. When you get knocked around, when life beats you up a little bit, you actually figure out, do you have the resolve to be as good as you think you can? And I will tell you, if you look at any champion in anything, right? Sport, acting, it doesn't matter, right? MMA, they pay a heavy, heavy, heavy price to be the best at what they do. Countless hours, broken bones, you name it, right? I mean, it's a heavy, heavy price.
Yeah.
We get to see what happens on Saturday, or we get to see what happens on Friday night, or we get to see what happens on Sunday. But, getting hit is just part of the journey. And I did not know that then. And I know it now. And it has made me infinitely better as a business person, is that I have the resolve and to do anything.
Wow. It's powerful, you guys. I'm over here taking notes. I hope you are as well. Expect to get hit. All of you real estate investors that are listening to this right now, we're going through some unique times. We're going through some challenging times, potentially for some of you. This is it. Do you have the stick-to-itiveness to get through anything?
I think most new business people, unfortunately, they get enamored with what's going on social media. They see an end product, they see whatever's happening, and they have no appreciation for what it actually takes, right? And you clearly know it. I clearly know it. I mean, that there is a level of dedication and intentionality that is very rare air, right? I mean, and I'm not talking about being good. I'm talking about being great. I'm not talking about being mediocre or average. I'm talking about being exceptional. And to get to that kind of level requires a lot of things, but certainly at its foundation, it certainly requires a general attitude and a general desire that is undeniable.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. I think back to, I had a snowboarding career, Kent. I don't know if I told you that, but I had a professional snowboarding career, and I'd meet all these kids at these events, and they'd always come up to me and tell me how lucky I was. And I'd look back and say, man, you don't know what I went through. You don't know what sacrifice happened and how much pain is, like what we've done to be standing. Right. I mean, you won't know. So it's really not luck. It's
to get the pro level of anything, brother. Like if I called you up, Dan, I said, hey man, I am going to be a professional MMA fighter. Not only am I going to be a professional MMA, I'm going to be the greatest MMA fighter ever. Now, I have gone and I have listened to every podcast. I've watched every UFC fight. I've listened to or I've watched every YouTube video. I've read every book, watched every social media post. I think I'm ready to do this now. You would be like, bro, have you lost your mind? Like, what are you talking about? Like, because clearly the expectation is that if I want to be a great MMA fighter, then one thing is for sure. I have to get in the ring. And if that's true, then clearly if I got into the ring, then there's another very clear expectation. I have to expect to get hit, to get knocked out, choked out, bones broken, bloodied, bruised, all those things. And when all that happens, go back to the corner, have my coach pull me up, get me ready, maybe watch some film, get me right back in there and do that for thousands and thousands and thousands of times. That is how a champion is made. And that's business.
It's business. Wow. It's nice to hear it from someone who's been through it. A lot of our guests have a lot of success. And it's one thing I love about this podcast is I get to hear firsthand and chat with people right here, front and center, just to be prepared. You think you've done something in real estate, you think you're doing all right. Just hold on. You're probably
dude, you've seen it in multifamily as much as anybody. Think about all of the wannabe syndicators.
Oh yeah.
Just in the last, 2 years that flooded into the market and got way out over their skis. And now they're having to make very painful capital calls, or even worse, right? Bankrupting projects because they were never prepared. Yep. They thought they were prepared, but they were never prepared for what the reality of their situation really entails. Doesn't mean you're going to get hurt, but if you go into it anticipating getting knocked around, it always makes you a better business person.
Yeah, and heck, even some of the folks they just lacked integrity. They just didn't do what they're saying they're going to do. It's businesses. It really tests your personality and character, and I love that about business. I kind of want to get your perspective on the current state of the real estate market. You kind of brought it up there. Given your vast experience in flipping and managing a large portfolio of homes, what do you see happening over the next, let's call it 2 or 3 years? Do you have any insight there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anything's. I mean, the fundamentals on on multifamily are still holding strong. I mean, there's in some markets there's a little bit of rent correction, but most fundamentals across the board are still holding steady. I think that certainly, as I just mentioned, there are challenges on the financing side of the deals where some people have gotten themselves in some very uncomfortable situations. But as it always happens, the market will work that kind of stuff out. It can't take away from the simple fact that whether it's in pricing or whether it's in debt, the restructuring will happen to get good assets back in the hands of people that deserve to have them and can perform for their investors and for their portfolio. That's that simple. I think that residential is in a very similar situation. I mean, the fundamentals are very strong. I mean, you have massive supply issues on residential real estate, period. There's no way to address the supply. Right? I mean, we're 5 million units, housing units short in the United States right now. There's no way to get those units built in any kind of timely manner. You have supply chain shortages. You have basically skilled labor shortages. You're 1.2 million skilled labor jobs short right now. In the past, for every skilled labor position that somebody was working on a new build, home development, whatever the case may be, it was a 1-for-1. They had an apprentice with them, right? Well, now it's a 7-to-1. Right. So for every 7 people on the job, there's only 1 apprentice in there. And so this is not fixing itself, which means we're only going to have more challenges. Right. And then now you layer over the element of the financing. The bottom line is as long as supply is in short supply, which it's going to be for the near future, prices are going to hold up because demand, regardless of financing, still exists and supply still hasn't caught up with demand. And so demand still exists. People that can still borrow at 6 or 7% and make all the math make sense. The prices are holding up. I don't see anything really changing in the foreseeable future. 10-year treasury, 3-year treasury, 1-year treasury says that the rates will probably start falling sometime later this year or next year. So that'll only increase demand. There's a lot of reasons to believe that the residential side of real estate and multifamily, single family is going to hold up. Now, the commercial side, specifically in office, I mean, that's just a bloodbath. Right, that is going to take decades to fix what is going on over there. But as long as you are in residential or you're in self-storage or you're industrial warehouse, I think you're just fine.
Got it. Did you have any sort of, I guess, looking back as you were transitioning or just looking back in your life, some of the main things that helped you be successful? Do you have any pivotal realizations or decisions you made that you could think back to that were like, this is a big moment for me? You know, for me, I think about when I was young and I decided I want to be a snowboarder, there was something that happened at 13, 14 years old where I'm like, holy cow, this is what I'm going to do. The passion and desire started going through the roof. And I just decided to laser focus no matter what, this is going to happen. Do you have anything in your life like that?
I think the big epiphany for me, if I had to look back, and it's kind of my main subject that I talk about, is when I understood the difference between being a hustler and a CEO. Right. And a hustler is what most, self-employed solopreneurs are, whether they realize it or not. And it's real easy to tell if you are. It's basically just the measuring stick is if you leave and don't go to the office for 2 months, what would happen?
Yep.
Would you have more money in your bank account than when you got back? And if you wouldn't, then you are officially a hustler. You own a job. And realizing that my first daughter was being born, and I'm newly married, I could easily own a job, right? And because I could fall into that trap again. And I really wanted to actually turn it into a business, which means I needed to put systems and processes and people and leverage in place and really take that very serious, where I get to own my time and have the options of doing what I wanted to do, and being able to arrive at a point in my life where I get to do things versus having to do things is a really, really powerful epiphany along the way. That is all done through scale. That is all done with intention. That is all done from moving from hustler to CEO. And really that requires a completely different mindset. And you got to get very, very dialed in on that.
What kind of mindset? Let's say you're heading to CEO land. What, because I'm sure there's a lot of folks right now that, and hey, us included right now, how can I do more with less? How can I bring more folks in, put them together, be a better CEO? What would be some of those mindsets?
You have to acquire the skill sets. I mean, if you think about your journey getting inside of real estate, there was a day when you started this process and you didn't know anything, right? And I would argue that It is exactly the same when you make a decision to become a great CEO. Like, you don't know anything. You think you do. And because what happens is you put people in place, you put some things in place, but the reality of it is it's a completely different skill set. Becoming an amazing leader, understanding how to manage KPIs, understanding how to lead and drive people, understanding how to create the outcome, understanding how to create the culture, understand, the org chart and the structure that needs to be put in place. There are a lot of moving pieces of it, but it is just as foreign. You build this massive business that's doing millions of dollars, but if you're still having to do anything, right, then you're still just a glorified hustler. The checks are just bigger. And so it is a dedication to say, hey, I'm going to surround myself with the people, the systems, the processes, the skills. I'm going to immerse myself. I'm going to go get the coaches. I'm going to go get the training. No different than what I was telling you earlier as an MMA fighter. What would you do to be great? Well, you wouldn't just go join your local boxing gym and hope it worked out. You would go get around the very best at what you're trying to do and write the checks, make the investment to fast track your success so that you could explode the opportunity. Now, earning that seat at the table day in and day out is a whole nother ballgame, baby. That's the way you do it, right? A great CEO clearly understands how to empower and manage people. You clearly understand that you are actually surrounding yourself with people that are better at the job than you are.
Yep.
As a CEO, if you're not hiring up versus hiring down, you're making a mistake. Like, your CFO should be the best that you can afford. Your CMO should be the best. Your CEO should be the best that you can afford. It should be the most painful checks that you ever write. But you should be able to quickly look back and identify that those decisions are put us to where now our business has exploded.
And how do you find those people? Like, I couldn't agree more. You got to find people that are the best. They're better than what you could ever be at this position in the job. How do you find that person?
The fastest strategy that we've ever found to do that is, one, we definitely understand our culture. Two, we use a company called Team Architects that turns around and builds effectively a profile of the job we're trying to do. And what they do is they have an avatar, basically. Let's just say you're hiring a chief operating officer. Across tens of thousands of chief operating officers, they've identified the skills, just not only personality, but cognitively, that this is the way a chief operating officer at the highest level, these are the skills they must have, and this is the way their brain must work, right? And so, because everybody processes information differently. For a chief operating officer, then we create that profile, and then we go target basically directors of operations, not necessarily COOs, of companies that we admire, right? If you think about it in the corporate culture, if you were going and find a COO for your multifamily portfolio, the very first place I'd look is go look at every REIT, go look at every single self-storage REIT, every multifamily REIT, every single family REIT that is out there, and go look at what their regional director of operations are like, because there can only be one COO in that corporation, but there's about 20 director of operations that all got passed up for that job. And they were there for the ride. They'd been there 10, 15 years, right? But they didn't make the final cut because there can only be one. And we go directly at them. Hey, I have an opportunity for you to come inside of my organization. We're much more entrepreneurial. We currently manage $100 million, $200 million, $300 million, but we're on our way to $1 billion. We want to bring you for the ride up. There's an opportunity for you to join our team. We've got a healthy salary, got an opportunity to bonus you, and we even have the opportunity for over a 4-year period for you to earn equity inside of this organization. Take this cognitive test, and then we'll take you to the next steps. And then when they take that test, if they come in at 90%, they're your person.
I just wanted to ask real quick on you have this boardroom mastermind. Is that right?
Yeah.
What could members expect? What is it? I haven't really dug
So boardroom is probably the thing I am the most proud of, right? So keep in mind that, as you mentioned earlier, we flip. Our family flips 800 to 900 houses a year. We do what's called turnkey investing. So we buy the properties, single family houses. We buy them, we completely rehab them in one of the 11 markets we're in, and then we turn around, put a renter in on a 2-year lease, and then we sell that as a performing asset to an investor. And then we stay in place and manage it for them. So, we're managing 8,000 single family homes in 11 different markets right now, right? And I would easily argue that we're the very best at what we do. You've got that. And then we have our, over the years, we've built a very, very well thought of coaching company that over the last 15 years, coached the better part of about 60,000 real estate investors. And, got a lot of things that have done well. But what sits on top of all of it is about 11 years ago, I started the Boardroom Mastermind. In the Boardroom Mastermind, as I was coming up in my journey in real estate, I was asked to be a part of a mastermind called the War Room. This was guys and girls came from all different walks of life. There was 12 of us. We met in Austin, Texas. It was Ryan Dice and Perry Belcher and Roland Frazier and, Frank Kern and a bunch of guys that were really good at what they did. And here I was, this guy that asked to be a part of it, had no idea why I was asked, but I was honored. And it had a profound impact on me. I had never been in a room where, you're effectively doing two things. You are pulling back the layers and saying, hey, this is what's challenging in my business right now, and I need help. And you are equally pouring into somebody else's business. And that can be a very, for type A personalities, business, it's a very uncomfortable situation, right? To say, hey, outside, it may look like I got it all hemmed up tight, but what's really going on here is I got some challenges, right? But it proved to be very, very valuable for me. So as my real estate career started really taking off, again, I don't know, I was probably 10 years into it. I said, I'm going to do the same thing in real estate. And I started the boardroom, and I started with 12 people, handpicked every one of them. And then, fast forward to 11 years later, there are 223 people that are inside of the boardroom as of today. And these are all of the very best real estate entrepreneurs, real estate investors in the country, period. Everybody in there is playing at a very, very high level. There are no newbies. There is no, hey, how do I start my LLC? How do I get something? None of that's going on. So you have to qualify to be in the room, right? And basically 3 major rules when it comes to it. Well, first off, we have our acceptance rate, and full transparency here is we get hundreds of applications a month, and year to date right now, we've accepted about 4%, right? So 96% of the people that come at us, for a variety of reasons, it's just not the right fit, right? They may be too new into the game or whatever the case may be. And probably a lot of them fall into the category of, we have a very strict no douchebag rule. Like, man, listen, I'm 53 years old. I'm really good at what I do. I pride myself on the people that I call friends, people like Ed Milet and Jesse Itzler and Bedros Keuilian and Dan Fleischman. I mean, these are people that I spend a lot of time with, and I understand the value of being friends and hanging around a lot of people that are worth hanging around. And so I'm in no way, shape, or form will ever compromise my time for anybody. And so if I'm going to spend a lot of time with the boardroom and my extended family, then the people that are going to be in there are going to be the people I want to be around and that I can learn from, and I can bring value to their lives, and they can bring value to each other. And so, number one, you got to be a real player in real estate. Number two, like I said, can't be a douchebag. Just because you can write a check does not mean you get in the room. Number three, you got to come in, to the boardroom ready to pour into your fellow members, right? There is no scarcity. What are you doing that's working? What can you help somebody with? How can you shorten somebody else's timeline? How can you connect them with a resource? And equally, the other thing, and the last rule is you got to come in and be vulnerable, right? Come in and immerse yourself and ask for help and allow others to do the exact same thing for you. Because, that's the sign behind me. The time is now. Like last time I checked, in the history of the world, nobody has ever gotten out alive, right? And so there's a ticking clock on every one of us. And I have no intention of wasting one of those minutes. And that's kind of the common theme with everybody in there, right? But basically, everybody's in there that they're looking to just shorten the curve, right? For instance, like if you guys are trying to go from 300 million to $1 billion, I'm sure you have some timeline. And I say, hey, we're going to get there in 5 years. And my first thing I would challenge you with was, how do we get there in a year? Tell me what it looks like. What do we need to do? And then how do we make that happen? And, we need people in our lives like that push us and show us how to actually make that happen. And when you get around a bunch of really qualified people that you respect like that, in this kind of members only environment, and they all are highly respected and they're all pouring into you and you pouring into them, it's a really special place really quickly. And so that group gets together, every quarter for a couple of days somewhere around the country, and all the members come in there. And again, probably the most common thing with everybody outside of time is everybody in there has the sentiment that, hey, I'm doing great, but I didn't come this far to come this far. This ain't it. Like, how do I get to the next level? What's it look like? How do I own my time? How do I spend more time with my family? How do I design this to where it's a massive asset that I can exit at some point? Like, those are the types of topics that are going on in there.
Man, that's awesome, Kent. In my life, masterminds have been the most pivotal thing so far for us too, just paying to associate and get around other people with very like-minded goals and are driven as hell. So last question, what does the hashtag FABL on your shirt mean here?
Well, some would say it's forget average, be legendary, but then others with a little bit more colorful language can replace that F. And I have a tendency to do that, but out of respect, I won't do it on here.
I love it. I love it. Kent, thank you for coming on. If our listeners want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Just hit me up on Instagram, man, or, at Kent Clothier, same thing on Facebook, same thing on TikTok, or, just go to kentclothier.com or theboardroommastermind.com. That's the easiest place to find me.
Awesome, Kent. Thanks so much for coming on. If you get a second, stick around. We're going to wrap this up. Thanks again for being here.
You got it, brother.